Explain to me like I'm a fucking 5-year-old, okay? Lamar signs this. He hasn't signed, okay? He has not signed. Only one time in 30 years, we learned via an Adam Schefter tweet, has somebody signed the non-exclusive tag and then ended up playing on a different team that negotiated a deal, and his team that put him under the franchise tag was not able to match the deal that somebody else offered. So one time, Gilbert, right?
Sean Gilbert.
Sean Gilbert, 30 years ago was the last time this happened. He goes from Washington to Carolina. I believe Carolina probably new stages there, so they were probably willing to do whatever to get players at that stage. Lambeau, do you know this?
Yep. I remember this really well, and it was a huge splash for him because, first of all, Gilbert had an agent that was really, it was challenging to get a deal done with him. And Sean was really involved in the negotiations too. And Sean had a sense of his value and he was intimately involved, and it was not an easy negotiation with him. And I think that at Washington had basically said, okay, we're not going to go down this and we'll do it. And then Carolina saw the opportunity to make a deal, and so that's what happened.
Okay, so we start talking about Lamar Jackson getting the non-exclusive tag. Well, he could just go to another team, we start thinking, because this was the conversation leading in to the franchise tag deadline was, is Lamar going to be exclusively franchise tag, which rarely happens, or non-exclusively franchise tag happen, which always, I got non-exclusive franchise tag. Difference is the 2 first-rounders and the ability to negotiate, and then bang, you're out. So those 2 first-rounders, that's you kind of chatted about this earlier about how that's negotiated. The way the rules state kind of is the 2 first-rounders almost get you in the door, then you can negotiate, and then if you and the player agree to it, then the next team the home team has 5 days to match it. What if they match it and the player doesn't want to play for that team, though? It's like, yeah, that's the deal for you, not for them. Like, the deal, is there an ability to do that? And does he have to sit out a year then, or can he say no and just take the franchise tag?
This is where the agent needs to be involved. So there's steps in this, right? So if I were representing Carolina and I wanted to get into this, to this deal, and I'm not saying they do, but if I were, I would call DaCosta on the phone and say, look, Eric, we know you want to trade him. Let's you and I work out a deal. We think the kid wants to play for us. You and I work out some kind of compensation, and then I'll deal with the mom and I'll deal with the player and I'll get a deal done. And then once we've agreed to that deal, we'll have Lamar sign the tender with you, and then we will trade you those picks for the tender, and then we'll redo his contract when we get him.
Got it.
Okay? All right, so that's how that's going to happen.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
That is.
It's a lot of layers here. It's a lot of layers. But the first layer that starts is you got to make sure that if I'm at Carolina, look, Eric, I know you want to trade the player. I don't give a shit what you're saying to me about, oh, he's going to play on the tender. You and I both know you didn't put that tender on him to not trade him. So forget about the 2 number ones. Here's the best offer I'm going to make.
And they can override the NFL and just say, yeah, we're taking this.
You could override it because once he signs the tender, now I can trade a player who is under contract.
Got it.
And there's no compensation to it. So now I say, look, Eric, I'm going to give you a 1 this year and I'll give you a 3. That's my best offer. What do you want to do? You want to keep that $32 million on your cap? You want him for 1 more year? What are you going to do? You going to franchise him again? I got leverage in this thing. So I'm negotiating this deal with him to get away from the 2 number ones. I'm not just saying to you, okay, now if I wanted to surprise DaCosta with a front-end loaded deal that he couldn't match, that's one thing. I don't want to do that. I want to deal with him. I want him involved in this. So I want to get him to agree to a deal. Then I agree with Lamar, and then I end up making the deal.
So you have to have 2 first, though. You have to have this year's first and next year's first, because they're saying that San Francisco 49ers can't get involved.
You only have to have that if you surprise them. Like, let's say Miami does not have a first-round pick. Okay? So Miami, Chris Greer calls up DaCosta and says, look, I'll give you a 1 in 24. I'll give you a 3 in 25. Okay, would you take that, Eric? DaCosta says yes. Okay, I've got permission to talk to Jackson. I've got a deal with Jackson. You and I have a deal. Jackson signs his tender. I'll trade you the 1 in 24 and the 3 in 25. I get him, and I redo his contract. That's it. Once he signs the tender, those 2 number ones are off the table.
So hold on, I have a question for you now. So Baltimore could technically, and I'm not saying anybody would want to do this because it would be terrible. They could just, sign, nah, fuck you. And is that something that could happen? Does that ever happen?
No, that would never happen because you would have to have an agreement. Like, look, we have a deal, and it's part of because here's what happens. Lamar's only signing a deal to get this bonus, and the Ravens can't do the contract, right?
So this is just a standard trade stuff. This is just extending the trade window almost, it sounds like.
Well, this is basically getting away from the 2 number ones. Once he signs a contract, you can't trade a player who's not under contract. Okay? You can't trade a player, but once he signs a contract, that exclusive right deal is off the table.
All right, so if Lamar Jackson's mom, do we know her name? We should know her name. She is currently a representative for a couple. She's about to negotiate a couple $100 million.
Felicia Jones.
Felicia Jones. So Felicia right now needs to be potentially reaching out to any team there's 10 of them that are quarterback needy teams and saying, hey, is there any way we can do business? Figuring out what they would be. And then going back to DaCosta, or the other GM would reach out to DaCosta then at that point and say, this is kind of how this goes. What does Felicia Jones need to do, you think, first? And how do we get that?
I think you should call Chris Greer on the phone and say, look, my son grew up in Pompano Beach. He played at Boynton Beach High School. He wants to play in Florida. That's where he wants to play. We will do a deal with you if you go make a deal. And take the Miami Dolphins temperature. Now, we know what their temperature is publicly. They don't want a quarterback out of yada.
Yeah, because Tua, they got to put up Tua.
Right. They got to take the temperature. And now Greer's got to go make a deal. I'll trade you X, Y, and Z. I know I can sign Jackson. And DaCosta will probably say on the first phone call, no, I'm going to keep Jackson. Well, that's why we're talking. Because you wouldn't put that non-exclusive if you're going to keep them, right? Like, that's why we're talking. See, trades aren't just about I'm going to give you a 1 and a 1. I mean, trades are about negotiations. It's about, like, who has leverage, who doesn't, right?
Selling.
If Ryan Poles had 3 number 1s like he said he did in that column that Peter King wrote, he would have made a deal already, right? It goes back to the great movie Rounders, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Like, you know, check, 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 you know? Like, when a guy's licking his cookie.
Hey, listen, I'm all about a good public negotiation, too. Ryan Poles is trying to figure it out. He's saying, hey, there's 3 number 1s on the table. So
that man, he peaks.
He's letting everybody know, like, I'm expecting a little bit more than this if you want to come into conversation.
Yeah, but he was licking his cookie. He's like Teddy and KGB. We know he's bluffing. It's the bluff. You know you don't have it. You had it, you're taking it. You don't have to tell somebody you got something.
No.
In this business, secrecy, when you have the leverage, you don't need to tell everybody you're the big dog.
So what do you think he was not planning that people, after they learn a little bit more about Anthony Richardson or C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young, might decide to get into the trade game, and he was setting a precedent? You don't think he was saying, like, hey?
I think he's trying to drum up business. I think he's trying to trade the pick in the next 5 or 6 days. I think he's probably got 3 or 4 teams that have interest. I think ideally, if you're him, you want to try to layer it down. You want to go from 1 to 2 to 5 and then add more, or you want to go from 1 to 9, whatever you want to do. But there's a lot of conversations behind the scenes about that pick that I think are happening, but I don't think it's where he said it was.
4th to 3rd overall pick. What is that normally? Like 4th
to
pick?
The chart would say X, but leverage says Y. So it depends on who you have.
Yeah, because if there's a 20 trying to get down to 3 and a 4's trying to get to 3, all of a sudden sitting at 3, you're competing with the 20 numbers because, hey, 4, this is available all of a sudden, right?
Those teams picking in the 20 can't get there. They don't have enough arsenal to get up there.
Oh, you don't think they can load it with back to get up that inside the first round, especially with only 3 quarterbacks allegedly. So, like, we're sitting at 4. Now, Jim Irsay had Peyton Manning right there.
Mm-hmm.
Now Ryan Leaf was there.
He was.
They went with Peyton Manning. Even though the dude that tripped on drugs out in Vegas that wrote that book.
Hunter S. Thompson.
Hunter S. Thompson told Jim Irsay, that Peyton Manning boy looks very thin.
Mm-hmm.
This Ryan Leaf guy's a big dog. So he has Peyton Manning, then Andrew Luck sitting there, right? Mm-hmm. So, like, that's pretty. Like, there's a lot of other owners looking around like, aren't you lucky? You hit the lottery twice. Sitting at 4 in this particular draft, that is
tough.
That is not because I think those top 3 guys, you think they're all just going to get interchanged? You think that's going to be? It depends on who you're talking to for the quarterbacks.
Nah. I get the sense that everybody wants that to be. I think if you take these guys, there's certainly there's strengths in all of them, and there's some weaknesses in every one of them. I mean, if you take Richardson, you're basically saying we need somebody. We got to redshirt him for a year. He based on his tape at Florida. Not his athletic tape, but his tape at playing.
A lot of drops on all the players.
It's going to take some time to get him up to the game. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm not saying that at all. I think I said this on my show. I've said it on the pod. I thought the guy, if he would have went back to school, he might have won the Heisman. I think he would have won the Heisman. I think this is a rare. I mean, I watched him play high school football too. I mean, this kid's really unique.
You think that
But
Florida
it's gonna
regime
take
right
some
now is going to
time.
win? Dude, I'm only saying this strictly because I watched Oregon State at the Vegas Bowl, and I got a chance to kind of check the temperature of the whole entire program almost via my Twitter. I don't know. I think he kind of had to go. And that Florida, hey, they're in an interesting spot right now. That Florida program is in a bad spot right now. Not saying that can't change overnight. And if you're an incredible player, you should be able to win overall. But this ain't like the Florida team that everybody thinks.
No,
this isn't
this
like
ain't even the Dan Mullen Florida team.
No, this is a different Florida team
What it used to be.
that I think a lot of
Like a
people are
pop,
thinking.
blah,
But
blah.
nonetheless, I appreciate the conversation there about draft and leverage. You're fucking so great at it, and I very much appreciate you.